Bringing you the rigs, the trucks, the laboratories, and offices, this is the Oil and Gas Contractors Connect podcast with your host, Ryan Ray.
Welcome to another edition of the Oil and Gas Contractors Connect podcast. Ryan Ray, your host here, as always, and today we have on Mark Puckett with iLEX Energy Corp. Mark, it's nice to meet you, and tell us a little bit about who you are and your company and what you guys do.
Thank you, Ryan. Nice to meet you as well. iLEX Energy Corp is a recently formed a U.S. entity put together by a team of investors and professionals who previously worked Black Sea out of Turkey. But with political situation being there what it was and the desire to get back closer to home, the principals have returned here and formed this company, and we're in the oil and gas exploration business as of now. My role is VP of exploration, so it's my job to see many of these projects come to life and to look out on the new horizons and to make sure that we're employing the best technologies we can to be as efficient and to mitigate as much risk as possible.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack some of that there. You said you'll come from the Black Sea. Now you're over here in Texas, I believe, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so kind of walk us through the transition from drilling the Black Sea to drilling in the great state of Texas.
Well, like I said, the main principals, and I was not a part of that operation in the Black Sea. I joined them after they came stateside, but they were involved in development of a very large gas field in Turkey. And again, things were going along pretty well, but the political climate there and changes the government made, its way they did business, were against whom or with whom you have no recourse, just made it untenable to continue on. And like I say, the principals were at a time in life anyway when they thought, well, it's a good time to go home anyway. And we came upon this project in South Texas, which is our main project. We call it the La Porta prospect. And it's just outside of Rio Grande City. So it really is down there on the border. And what's interesting about it is it offsets a producing field, but it's never been touched because in the early 80s, this became a national wildlife refuge.
Oh, wow.
And we think that sitting under that national wildlife refuge is a very nice conventional gas play. And again, it's an extension geologically of the field just immediately and across the highway from it. So we're pretty excited about that opportunity. Of course, the market hasn't been favorable toward natural gas. It's been more oily, if you will. But that's one of our biggest prospects right now. It's our primary.
Right. Sorry to cut you off. It's interesting because it feels like, 3 to 5 years ago, horizontal drilling, fracking, that was the talk. But as we've gone through two downturns, I guess, in the last, 12 years now with the natural gas bubble that burst, and then obviously the oil downturn a few years ago, I'm starting to hear, and maybe it's just, one of those things where you just happen to hear it because you happen to hear it, but it feels like conventional plays, if you will, conventional drilling is kind of getting more of a renaissance amongst Texas producers and Louisiana producers. I know of some companies who have kind of shifted their focus. When you guys decided to move, and look at drilling in Texas, was there consideration to do horizontal wells, or was conventional kind of, it's a little bit safer, it's a little bit more cost effective, and just kind of started on that trajectory from the beginning?
Well, those are good questions. I spent almost 35 years with Schlumberger, and I was in the very beginning of the what we called back then resource plays, and the horizontal drilling and all the fracking and that sort of thing. And I had one of the technical groups that really was deeply involved in that business, that part of the business. So I'm quite familiar with it, and I think we kind of lost sight of the fact that horizontal drilling has been around for a very long time. My first encounter with it was back in 1982 on top of the Grand Mesa in Colorado, where Dyco Petroleum drilled a horizontal well into the Cozette Sandstone, and they blew the rig down. They had to call up Red Adair. So horizontal drilling has been used in conventional plays for all this time since, but it became quite effective in exploiting these resource plays because, of course, it gave you an enormous amount of contact with a very low permeability reservoir, and being able to expose that to the wellbore made these type of resource plays, source rock plays, however you want to characterize them, profitable. And that's really what drove that, and really reduced the risk of development and exploitation. So horizontal drilling is a technique, and it's certainly something that we are considering, in the pursuit of this field development. We still need to get our discovery well down. We're highly confident about that. But as we look forward, we do intend on looking at horizontal drilling if it's appropriate for this reservoir. And again, it's a combination of reservoir permeability, the lithology of the reservoir, the cost of doing it compared to drainage area and that sort of thing. So all of those elements come into play in making that decision. It is reservoir specific.
Right. And so you guys, obviously, you mentioned that, you're the vice president of exploration, but you guys, I would imagine, have a team that kind of comes together. For maybe some of our listeners who are more in the midstream side of things, and they're saying, okay, well, E&P, I think of Pioneer or Apache or someone like this, but this is more of a I don't want to say mom and pop, that's the word, but a small funded type E&P compared to something like you might hear in the news. What are some of the differences that you would see in a company like yours versus a Pioneer or an Apache or a Chesapeake or one of the ones you might hear in the news as far as forming the company? How do you guys maybe are a little bit different in obviously not your specific strategies, but how do you guys think fundamentally versus a company that you might read in the headlines?
Well, excellent question, because a small company has limited resources, and as we are just beginning, we don't have production cash flow to drive us at this point. So we have to seek out investors, folks that'll come along for small portions and larger portions of our prospects. But it also makes us take a very careful look at absolutely everything we do, and to be wise and effective. And in other words, everything that you do carries some degree of risk, both now and in the future. And you have to balance that out. I mean, as we look ahead and we really begin planning the development of the field, even before we drill the first well. And why is that? And it's because so many decisions have to be made in terms of, for example, 3D seismic. Well, what type of 3D seismic do you want to shoot? Well, you can shoot something that's been traditionally done, laid up, something that people's done for years. But is that really going to meet the needs of the reservoir as you continue on? What kind of information are you going to need to extract? And you need to begin to design for that, because you want to spend that money only once.
Right.
You don't want to come back in and say, well, now we need to do a 3D that'll give us the reservoir properties information that we need. That's just throwing, additional money into the same hole. And so we really take a close look at how far can we extend each expenditure. And if we're going to spend this money, let's spend it right, and let's make the best decision for the long term.
Right, and so there's pros and cons to everything, I guess you could say. And so one of the things we look at, I'll pick Pioneer just to use that as an example. You look at like Pioneer, and because they're a publicly traded company, every quarter they have to report, and you get these folks on Wall Street who are analyzing it and trying to figure out if they did a good job or not. And I'm personally not a big fan of the quarterly reporting method because I think it changes how you conduct your business and how you want your numbers to reflect. But obviously, publicly traded companies can bring in a lot of cash, and so there's kind of the offset for that. A privately held company like you guys, you're a little bit different because you can look a little bit more long term, and I would imagine the founding members are going to have some skin in the game. So, what maybe kind of delineate some other things for listeners who they haven't thought about when you talk about a privately held E&P company versus a publicly held company.
Well, again, I think you're absolutely right, and I've saw it throughout my career that publicly held companies live for the quarterly reports, and they make decisions based on that, and they make commitments based on that, and it can have an adverse influence on the way they conduct business because instead of conducting the business of their business, they're conducting the business of Wall Street, of satisfying Wall Street. For us, we certainly stay in touch with our investors regularly. And as a matter of fact, I think from a relationship perspective, I mean, there's a lot of maintenance for us in keeping our investors informed and what's going on. I mean, they don't like to go long periods of time without hearing from us. So, in fact, I mean, we speak to them more than just quarterly.
Right.
But again, we also have the luxury of being able to talk to them, explain our strategies, and explain the long-term use of the monies that they're investing, and why this is the best way to look at this approach. For example, during the early 2010s, there were a lot of techniques that came up in shooting reconnaissance 3D surveys, high productivity 3Ds, 20, 30, 40,000 shot points in a 24-hour period, where they're just going out and they're shooting these things, and they're just trying to find structure. And so it's low quality on the one hand, but it's fit for purpose on the other. And this is mainly being done in the Middle East. Well, they can afford that because when they decide where to drill, they'll come in and they'll shoot then a proper high-resolution survey that will give them the reservoir properties they need to produce the field properly. They have the funds to do that. Those kind of funds could get buried in with all their other costs very easily. For us, no. We carefully look at every piece of information that we're acquiring, every bit of acreage that we look at. Why are we doing this? What's going to be the benefit of it? What is our optimization process? We don't cookie cutter anything, because the moment you start doing that, you start, in my opinion, you start losing. You quit being as effective as you could have been, either in cost control or in the quality output. But on the other hand, within larger companies, publicly held companies alike, there are best practices. This is the way we do things books that tell you that as long as you stick to these rules, you're going to be fine and you're not going to get in trouble. And we adhere to our policies, and we did this, we did that, and you check all those boxes. Well, for us, we have to take each project individually and look at how we might optimize it based on our experience. And we have quite a bit of experience, within our company because we're all products of from the 80s through the 90s and 2000s oil industry. So we can take that longer look at things and I think make better decisions about how to use the funds that we have.
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking when you're talking there is, I know of startups and, tech companies and stuff, and they're trying to crack into the oil and gas industry, and they're usually trying to get in front of an ExxonMobil maybe, or a Shell, one of the, the majors that's really hard to get in front of, but they do, those companies obviously have wings and divisions devoted for stuff like that. So it's hard to get in on one sense, but they also have kind of a path, if you will, a Shark Tank or something like that. I can't remember the exact name of the Exxon fund that they use, but they have a program for that. So it does give them potentially a competitive advantage on better drilling techniques and stuff like this. You guys, as you mentioned, you're going to bring together a vast, long range of experience from different parts of the world and different backgrounds, and try to put together a team that kind of has that. How do you balance, the 20, 30, 40-year career and knowing, okay, we can do it this way, with understanding that there is new technology, maybe a more cost-efficient way here, but because you're not maybe a big name, you don't get those vendors beating down your door. So how do you balance, okay, we know how to do it this way, but also kind of keeping your eye out there to look for new things on the horizon?
Well, in our case, I mean, I spent most of the last 4 or 5 years of my career at Schlumberger's Wireline headquarters, and I was the manager of their borehole geophysics domain. So I had the good fortune of being on the leading edge of technology development and interfacing with engineering centers and research centers. And when I went to conventions and so forth, it was my job to look out for new technologies and the like. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's a little different because we have that kind of experience within our company, and I find that when I look at the way things are done today in our business, so much of it really hasn't changed that much. In other words, there's a lot of people doing things the same way they've been doing it for the last 20 years. And there have been great advances in technologies and techniques. And so we're always on the lookout for that type of stuff. And,
let me hop in there and ask you this, because on the Texas Oil and Gas podcast a while back, we were talking about some people complaining about the headlines, oil and gas technologies improve drilling, and they keep saying, well, it's too vague, it's not enough, and so the co-host and myself, we kind of compared it to, well, you kind of, for a long period of time, you had kind of the old Razor phone, or the old Nokia phone, and then you went to the iPhone, and now we're just going from one iPhone to the next. It's kind of similar to what you're saying, is that we're getting updates, but they're not these large swings where you're going from the old rotary phone, if you will, to the iPhone. You're kind of going from the iPhone 3, the iPhone 4, to the 4S, and so on and so forth. And so you are seeing incremental improvements, but which do make a big potential, big savings if you have a lot of wells to drill and things like that. But overall, it's more of a slight upgrade compared to getting a new computer. Would you kind of agree with that analogy?
I would say, there's truth in that. I mean, the tools, the basic tools that we have today, are the basic tools that have been in place for a very long time. Uh-huh. But what we have today also are enhancements of those tools that right. create have a significant impact on what we can do with the information they provide. And let me give you an example. One thing that I was involved with from very early on was the development of low-frequency sweeping of vibrators. So the vibrators we use to generate seismic signals for our 3D surveys or 2D surveys. Now, the problem, people often use dynamite in the past because they felt like they got the broadband approach. They got low frequencies and high frequencies, but it was often an unbalanced spectrum because the bigger dynamite charge you use, the more low frequency you got, and the less high frequency you could see. And these vibrators come along, and they offer more control on the high end, but at the same time, they don't have the capability to generate the low frequencies you need. And what's important about that is when you try to go from a seismic wiggle trace to rock properties, we've only really been able to do it in a relative sense until very recently. And that's because we did not have this low frequency component to the seismic data. And if you look at the last, at least about 10 years, been a lot of research and work being done on both sensors and sources to get low frequencies down to 2 hertz, that kind of thing. Uh-huh. And that helps us to move then to when we invert our wiggle traces to rock properties, we're getting closer to absolute values of rock properties. And that is a risk mitigator. That throws out some of that question as to what do we really have down there? And in terms of making decisions about how do we drill this thing horizontally, or if we can, and where should we put our frac stages? those kind of things, then you can begin to answer with this rather than trial and error in the field. When you start out with very strong information data set that's much more reliable than we've been able to achieve before.
I want to circle back around to one thing that we talked about a minute ago. We talked about this idea. I know you said you're privately funded. I think the website even alludes to you might be still looking for investors. We can tackle that in a second. But one of the things I'm curious is you said you talk to investors regularly, and my son had a school project the other day, and he had to track the open and closes of some stocks. And so I picked up, I don't know, a share or two of Chesapeake stock and a share or two of some non-oil and gas stock. So he had to have two. So I picked up two different ones. And, the thing is, I'm curious because now I think I still have those two shares of Chesapeake stock for whatever they're worth, $2 or whatever it is. But even if I were to amplify my holdings in Chesapeake, and let's say I 100x my holdings, I still really wouldn't have the ability to influence or to get the CEO on the phone because I'm still a very small shareholder in a company like Chesapeake Energy. As you guys are rolling out what you're looking to do and your plans, and you touched on this earlier, you said, well, we don't talk to our investors quarterly, we talk to them more often than that, or sometimes less often than that. I'm curious, how do you guys handle quote-unquote corporate relations in the mentality? Because there seems to be a fine line with, as you mentioned, a publicly traded company. They're gonna try to they're trying to please Wall Street and please investors and all this stuff. But you guys, you can kind of get a little bit more in the nitty gritty. Obviously, you don't want to reveal all your quote unquote trade secrets. But how do you go through the process of making the investors feel comfortable with what you're doing, as far as, okay, hey, we're going to drill this date, or this got shifted around and here's why, and guess what, we're going to drill this well, and if it goes well, we're going to drill these 5, 10, 20 wells, whatever it is, and then we're going to bring in pipelines, or we're going to truck the product or whatever. How do you guys handle that process on a personal level? Because it's a lot different than getting on the conference call and talking to Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal and things like that on a quarterly basis.
Well, you're right, it is, because when you have individual investors, you have to, keep them informed and also keep them engaged, because at some point, and we know that this happens, you can have project fatigue, and an investor will just say, I've gone as far as I can go with this. So the next call, it's made for continue funding. I think I'm just going to cut my losses and go. And so you have to give them a very valid reason to stay on, to keep investing with you. And there are things that ding you along the way. There are drops in product price and that sort of thing that slows down, and the equity markets and so forth, they get skittish about this or that, and it makes getting funding more difficult from some of those institutions. Everybody wants zero risk or less, and 25% annual return.
Right. Right.
It's just impossible numbers. The type of numbers and risks and that sort of thing that made sense 10, 15 years ago doesn't make sense anymore to those type of investors. So one of the biggest challenges is keeping your investors engaged in the project, making sure that they understand. In other words, we can't just tell them we're doing this or that. We have to explain the whys and wherefore and why it's the best use of their money to head this particular direction. And so that, I would say, is one of the things that we battle, is keeping them engaged, keeping them interested, and making sure that they don't suffer from project prospect fatigue, investment fatigue, where they just say, I'm just going to take my money elsewhere.
Right. No, that's a great point. Okay, we're running up against our allotted time here, so I got one more question, and then we will bring the plane to land, if you will. You mentioned you worked for Schlumberger for a long period of time. Obviously now you're the VP of Exploration. For the folks on the vendor side of the business, the contractors, if you will, give us some practical advice on dealing with E&P companies, large, small. You've got a very wide range of experience. What are some practical things that maybe you see or you did see or now you see differently? You've been on both sides of the table here. You go, you know what? The vendors, the contractors are lacking this, or they're not good about explaining this, or they're not helping us understand this. What are some deficiencies that you would say that you see in the marketplace, if it's either from the standpoint of offering a service, as you mentioned, like maybe they're not informing potential clients of what their services are very clearly, or they don't understand maybe what the client even needs, and so they have a nice suite of services, but they're not actually offering something specific for what companies are needed. So I'll let you take it however you want to. Those are just some areas that may fit into what you've seen.
Well, you bring up a great question, and certainly some of my jobs in Schlumberger have put me sort of on this side of the desk previously, and I talk to a lot of our young people about understanding the business of the business you're in. Mm-hmm. And I think with contractors, they have to understand not just their business, but they need to understand the oil business itself. And now that there's a lot of folks like me who are out there that have a lot of experience in the business, you need to, one, understand our business, and two, know that we probably understand your business pretty well. Mm-hmm. And we need to see that you bring real value to what we're going to do. That, in other words, that you are going to impact in a positive way, the monies of our investors, because that's to whom we're beholden to, not to Wall Street on a grand scale, but to individual investors who are, making decisions at home with their families and saying, they're making a call, and do we want to continue on with this and that sort of thing. And we want to line up contractors that are sensitive to that issue, that understand what we're trying to accomplish and why we're trying to accomplish it. In other words, we're not doing technology for technology's sake. It has to make financial sense as well. And those are the type of people that we are certainly going to align ourselves with.
Yeah, I think
someone that just someone that just comes in and say, we can do this for you, here's the price, and all that. Well, fine, but go on down the road, because, we're looking for somebody with whom we can really work.
No, I think that's great. I think,
what we're trying to do.
One of the things I tell people is, in the oil and gas business, the first thing that it seems like everyone wants to fill out when they meet each other is what do you know and who do you know? Because you have these big boom cycles and you get people from other industries who kind of flood our industry, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, how do you fit into this industry? And so understanding the industry, understanding as much as you can about your customers and your vendors and your competitors, all that definitely plays into it. And there's only so much, obviously, each of us can know, but I think that's a very important point of understanding exactly what it is, and trying to work around issues that are sensitive for a privately funded E&P company versus a publicly traded company, because those are different animals altogether, as we've discussed. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up with this. Let's tell folks. I don't know exactly where you were at in your funding, but if you want to pitch something about that, or folks that might be interested in investing. If not, that's fine. But where can folks find out more about what you guys are doing and kind of follow along in this journey that you guys have?
Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. So we are iLEX Energy Corporation, and you can find us at ilexenergycorp.com. And our principal project is our La Puerta project. It's an 89 BCFE opportunity in South Texas, just east of Rio Grande City. And, like I say, it's offsetting a large field, and we are still looking for investors for this opportunity. And it is gas, conventional, yet it's been untouched for decades because there's been a wildlife refuge on top of it. And we've worked with those folks to shoot some initial 2D seismic, so we know how to work with them. They are pleased with our work and pleased to be working with us. So that's really not that big of an issue. And again, it's a conventional reservoir, and so you're not going to have the sharp decline curves that you see in unconventional reservoirs. This is long-term stuff, and it's in the Queen City Formation. and it's a good reservoir for producing natural gas with some liquids. So iLEXenergycorp.com. Get a hold of us, and we'll talk to you about what an opportunity we have for you.
Okay, and we will link to that in the show notes. Mark, thank you for your time today, and to the listeners, we will talk to you tomorrow.